I never imagined my marriage would turn into the darkest chapter of my life. Emily and I met back in our sophomore year of college. She was striking, smart, funny, and absolutely stunning. We started dating shortly after meeting, and there was an undeniable spark between us. After we graduated, we got married and started building a life together. I thought we had the perfect relationship, but sometimes, what seems perfect is just an illusion. We had been married for 12 years when things began to shift. At first, I brushed off the small signs. Emily started paying a lot more attention to her appearance, staying late at work, and taking private phone calls. I was too wrapped up in my job at the law firm to think much of it. But those little things gradually became more obvious, and it felt like I was watching a car crash in slow motion, helpless to stop it. One night, I decided to surprise Emily by picking her up from work and taking her out for dinner. She had been working overtime a lot lately, and I thought a date night might lift her spirits. But when I arrived at her office, it was dark and empty. Confused, I gave her a call. She answered breathlessly, claiming she had just left a late meeting and would be home soon. Something in her voice seemed off, but I decided not to push it. This was the first real sign that something was wrong. As weeks passed, my suspicions grew. Emily became more distant, and her explanations for being out seemed less believable. I tried gently asking if everything was okay, but she dismissed me, saying I was just being paranoid. I wanted to believe her, but there was a gnawing feeling in my gut that would not go away. Our physical relationship also started to suffer. Emily often turned down my advances, saying she was tired or stressed. When we did connect, it felt hollow, as if some invisible wall was now between us. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. One day, while cleaning up, I found an unfamiliar set of keys in Emily's purse. They did not belong to our house, her car, or her office. When I asked her about them, she snapped, saying they were for a friend's apartment that she was helping out with while they were away. Her defensive reaction only made me more suspicious. Then came the day that shattered everything. I was working from home, going through some files, when I received a message from an unknown number. It was a series of photos showing Emily with another man, in compromising situations, sent by someone who claimed to be the man's wife. The man in the photos turned out to be Emily's stepbrother, David. I was in shock, barely able to process the betrayal. David and Emily had always been close, but I never suspected anything improper between them. I felt a whirlwind of anger, humiliation, and heartbreak. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was I the last to find out? Desperate for answers, I decided I needed more proof before confronting her. I started monitoring her phone, checking her emails, and even followed her when she left the house. It did not take long to confirm my worst fears: the affair was real, and it had been happening for months. The final blow came when I overheard a conversation between Emily and David. She was complaining about our marriage, saying that I never understood her, that I was too absorbed in my career, and that David was the only one who truly loved her. Her words cut deep. It was not just the cheating, she despised me. My first impulse was to confront her in a fit of rage, but I held back. I needed a plan, something that would make her see the gravity of what she had done. Divorce was certain, but that alone felt insufficient. Emily's complete disregard for our marriage demanded a more severe response. I decided that I would make sure she regretted ever crossing me, but I would stay within the bounds of the law. And so, my journey toward a calculated revenge began. After the initial shock wore off, I spent a sleepless night plotting my next steps. An angry confrontation might have been satisfying, but I wanted something that would stick, something that would weigh on her every day. I needed help, and the first person who came to mind was my old college buddy, Mike. Mike and I had been tight since our university days. He was an expert in information technology, known for his knack for finding things and getting things done quietly. Most importantly, he was loyal and had always had my back. If anyone could help me carry out a plan that stayed within legal limits, it was Mike. The next day, I called him up and asked if we could meet. We chose a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop where we would not be overheard. When I walked in, Mike was already there in a corner booth, his laptop open in front of him. "Dan, it's been a while," he said, standing up to shake my hand firmly. "You sounded serious on the phone. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and dove into the story, leaving out none of the painful details. Mike listened carefully, his expression shifting from concern to anger as I told him about Emily's betrayal and my plan for revenge. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "Man, Dan, that is rough. I am so sorry you are going through this," he said, shaking his head. "But I get it, you want to make sure she faces the consequences. So, what is the plan?" I laid out my thoughts. My main idea was to expose Emily and David's affair in a way that would hurt them both deeply. I wanted undeniable proof, something I could make public that would strip Emily of the respect and status she seemed to care so much about. Mike nodded, a determined look in his eye. "All right," he said, closing his laptop. "We can definitely make this happen, but we need to be smart. First, we have to gather every bit of evidence, photos, messages, anything that proves their affair. We should also make note of any assets Emily might try to claim in the divorce. Once we have everything, we can figure out the best way to release it." Mike's analytical approach gave me confidence. He pulled out his phone and began typing, already organizing our next steps. "I can set up surveillance on her phone and laptop," Mike said calmly, though his eyes gleamed with a focused determination. "We will be able to access her messages, emails, and even her social media. I can also track her locations, so we will know exactly when she meets up with David." "Isn't that illegal?" I asked, hesitating, feeling a knot of unease tighten in my stomach. "Not if we are careful," Mike replied, his voice steady. "We will use software that leaves no trace, and we will not actually break into anything, just keep tabs on what she willingly puts out there. Trust me, Dan. I know what I am doing." Over the next few weeks, Mike and I worked relentlessly. He set up surveillance on Emily's phone and laptop, and before long, we had a mountain of incriminating evidence. The texts, emails, even photos of her with David were piling up, each one like a fresh stab in the back. The more we uncovered, the colder and angrier I became. Then, one evening, we found something that made my blood run cold. We stumbled upon a series of emails between Emily and David, where they not only mocked me but also discussed plans to get their hands on our assets once the divorce was settled. Emily even mentioned trying to gain full custody of our daughter, Grace, just to make sure I suffered. The sheer cruelty in her words twisted in my chest like a blade. "That is it," I muttered, slamming my fist on the table, my voice tight with fury. "We are going to make this public. They need to be exposed, and everyone needs to see exactly who they are." Mike's face was grim as he nodded. "Agreed. But we need to do it in a way that guarantees maximum impact. We will put together everything we have, a whole file that leaves no room for doubt, and then we send it to everyone who matters in their lives, friends, family, colleagues." He paused, thinking. "And we will make sure it hits the right places online too." We spent days meticulously compiling the evidence, creating a comprehensive dossier that laid out the entire affair, every deceitful detail. Once it was ready, Mike used his network to make sure it reached exactly where it would hurt them most. The fallout was explosive. The scandal spread like wildfire. Emily's friends and family were horrified, her colleagues were shocked, and David's career took a devastating hit. The affair they had hidden so carefully was now the talk of everyone they knew, and there was nowhere left for them to hide. But I was not finished. This was only the beginning. I wanted to make sure Emily felt the weight of her betrayal every single day. With the first phase of our plan in motion, I felt a dark satisfaction, but I knew I needed something even more undeniable, a confrontation that would leave her with no way to twist the truth. Mike and I kept close watch on her movements, thanks to the tracking app he had set up on her phone. We noticed a pattern. Every few days, usually in the afternoon, she went to an address we soon confirmed was David's place. I realized that the next time she went there, I would confront them both and capture every last second on video. It would be painful, but I needed that proof, something irrefutable that would finally end this nightmare. A few days later, my phone buzzed with the notification we had been waiting for. Emily was heading to David's house again. I quickly messaged Mike, "She's on her way. Meet me at the usual spot." Mike's reply came instantly, "On my way. See you in 10. I grabbed my phone and a small video camera, the cold weight of it grounding me. When I met Mike a few blocks from David's place, he handed me a sleek, inconspicuous device that looked like an ordinary key fob. "This has a high-quality hidden camera," he explained. "Press this button to start recording." Just make sure you get clear shots of their faces and anything incriminating. I nodded, feeling a mix of dread and determination. All right, let's do this. We parked a little way down the street from David's house, waiting in tense silence. Soon enough, we saw Emily's car pull into the driveway. She got out, glancing around nervously before hurrying inside. A wave of anger washed over me, but I shoved it down. Focus. I needed to stay calm. It is go time, I muttered, gripping the camera tightly. Mike stayed in the car, monitoring the tracking feed, while I approached the house. I knew there was a side door that David often left unlocked. Heart pounding, I made my way around the house, found the door, and tried the handle. It turned easily. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, every nerve on edge as I moved as quietly as possible. The house was dead silent, except for faint sounds coming from upstairs. I crept up, one careful step at a time, my pulse thundering in my ears. As I reached the top, the unmistakable sounds of passion filtered through one of the closed bedroom doors. I clenched the key fob camera in my hand, pressed the button to start recording, and prepared myself for what was about to come. With one quick push, I swung the door open. The scene that greeted me was both crushing and, in a twisted way, validating. Emily and David were wrapped around each other, oblivious to the world outside. My voice, low and trembling with rage, cut through the room. What the hell is going on here? Emily and David froze, their faces going pale with shock. Emily scrambled to cover herself, while David leapt up, frantically grabbing for his clothes. Dan, what are you doing here? Emily stammered, her face drained of color. I could ask you the same thing, I said, lifting the camera for emphasis, though we all knew exactly what was going on here. David took a step forward, his face red with fury, but I backed away, keeping the camera pointed squarely at them. Stay right there. This is all going on record. You son of a, David spat, his voice thick with rage. You have no right to do this. Oh, I have every right, I replied, my voice cold and steady. This is what you both get for betraying me. Emily began to sob, her shoulders shaking, but I felt nothing. She had made her choices, and now she would live with them. I let the camera record for a few more painful moments, capturing the full scope of their humiliation, and then I turned and walked out, leaving them there to stew in their own disgrace. As I made my way back to the car, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The final piece of evidence was now in my hands. Mike was waiting, his expression hard but supportive. Did you get it? He asked quietly. I nodded, holding up the camera. Everything. Good, he said with a grim satisfaction. Now we can move to the next phase. We drove back to Mike's place in silence, both of us focused. Once there, we reviewed the footage, making sure everything was clear and undeniable. With this video, there would be no room for Emily or David to twist the truth. For the first time in weeks, I felt a grim satisfaction, imagining the storm that would follow. The betrayal was carved deep, but I would make sure they paid the price. As we finalized our next steps, a renewed sense of purpose coursed through me. This was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The fallout from the video was swift and brutal. Within days, everyone who mattered in Emily and David's lives had seen it. The reactions were harsh and unforgiving: condemnation, disgust, disbelief. Emily's reputation crumbled in front of her, and her once close friends and family turned their backs on her. The hardest blow, however, came from her own family. Emily's parents had always admired our marriage, seeing it as a model of stability and respect. When they discovered her affair, they were devastated. Her mother called me, voice trembling with sorrow, apologizing for her daughter's actions and expressing her deep disappointment. Emily's father, usually a calm and stoic man, could barely contain his anger. When he called, his voice shook with fury, promising to support me in any way I needed. But the family's scorn did not end there. Her cousin Anna, known for her cutting humor, turned every family gathering into a public roast. She taunted Emily mercilessly, her remarks dripping with sarcasm and disdain. At one particularly tense family dinner, Anna raised her glass with a smirk, saying, "Here's to Emily, always keeping things in the family, huh?" Emily's face went beet red as she stared at her plate, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The room fell silent, thick with judgment, until someone hastily changed the subject. But the damage was done. Emily's standing in the family had been reduced to a source of ridicule and shame. While Emily dealt with her family's wrath, I was focused on the next steps. Protecting my future, and our daughter, Grace, became my top priority. With the video evidence and all the materials Mike and I had collected, divorce was now inevitable. I was determined to make it swift and decisive, ensuring Emily received as little as possible from our shared assets. I contacted my lawyer, Mr. Collins, a sharp, no-nonsense professional known for his precision in family law. His office, sleek and modern, felt like a fortress of calm control. He greeted me with a firm handshake, nodding as he reviewed the file I had sent over. "You have built quite a case here," he remarked, his tone measured. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. I just want this handled quickly and cleanly," I replied, taking a seat. "With the evidence we have, it is straightforward," he assured me. "We will file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity. Given the circumstances, you stand a strong chance for full custody of Grace." For the next hour, we meticulously went over the details. Mr. Collins laid out each step, ensuring I understood every part of the process. His calm, methodical approach reassured me, and by the time I left, I felt certain we were on the right track. That evening, I sat down with Grace, preparing myself for one of the hardest conversations I would ever have. She was curled up on the couch, absorbed in her book, her innocent eyes full of trust. "Grace, sweetie," I said gently, sitting beside her. "There is something important I need to tell you." She looked up, curious. "What is it, Dad?" I took a steadying breath. "Your mom and we are getting a divorce." I kept my tone calm, though my heart was breaking. "We both love you very much, but we cannot stay together. This is not your fault, it is between your mom and me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she hugged me tightly. "I do not want you to get a divorce, Dad." "I know, honey. I know." I held her close, stroking her hair. "Sometimes, things do not turn out the way we hope. But we are going to make sure you are okay. You will still see both your mom and me. We both love you so, so much." Over the following weeks, the divorce moved forward. Emily was served the papers, and her reaction was as dramatic as I had expected. She begged for another chance, pleaded with me to reconsider, but my mind was set. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too severe. Her own family's rejection only deepened her misery. They had taken my side, openly expressing their disappointment and anger. And Anna's relentless mocking continued, turning every family event into a fresh nightmare for Emily. Her once proud demeanor withered under the strain, and she withdrew further from everyone around her. Amid the chaos and heartache, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was the right path. I would protect Grace and ensure she grew up in a stable, loving environment. Emily's betrayal had shattered our marriage, but it would not ruin our lives. I was determined to rebuild, stronger and more resolved than ever. As the divorce case advanced, I stayed in close contact with Mike. His support and expertise had been invaluable, and I knew I could count on him for whatever lay ahead. Together, we would ensure that justice was served, and that Emily would face the full consequences of her actions. With the legal proceedings underway and Emily facing the fallout from her own family, it was time to secure my financial future and prevent her from taking advantage of me ever again. I knew I had to secure Emma's future, making certain that Emily would not take more than she deserved. With Mike's help, we began digging through our financial records, hoping to uncover any hidden trails of betrayal. Mike, always the tech wizard, set up a system to monitor Emily's bank accounts and credit card transactions. What we found was like a slap in the face. Not only had Emily been lavishly spending on herself, but she had also been secretly funneling money to David. Thousands of dollars had been transferred to his account, disguised as payments for services. One evening, Mike looked up from the computer screen, his face dark with disbelief. "Thomas, you need to see this," he said, pointing at the data on the screen. "Emily has been siphoning funds from your joint account to support David. This is not just infidelity, this is financial abuse." I stared at the screen, each number a fresh wound. The rage simmered, cold and relentless. "Unbelievable," I muttered, my voice low. "She's been using our hard-earned money to fund her affair. This changes everything." Mike nodded solemnly. "We need to compile this evidence. This will strengthen your case and ensure she walks away with as little as possible in the divorce." We spent the next few days meticulously gathering and organizing the financial records, creating a detailed report that laid bare every single deceitful transaction. As we worked, a twisted sense of satisfaction grew in me. Every line of evidence, every damning detail, brought me closer to justice. When it was ready, I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Collins to review our findings. As I walked into Mr. Collins's office, he greeted me with a firm handshake and a grave expression. "Thomas, good to see you. What have you got for me?" I handed him the file, and he leafed through the evidence, his eyebrows raising in shock as he absorbed the contents. "This is substantial," he said quietly. "With this, we can argue that she not only betrayed you emotionally but also financially. The court will not look kindly on this." "Exactly," I replied, steeling myself. "I want to ensure Grace is taken care of, and that Emily does not walk away with more than she deserves." Mr. Collins nodded, his tone resolute. "We will present this in court. This will have a significant impact on both the divorce settlement and custody arrangements. You have done the right thing by gathering this evidence." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of court appearances and tense proceedings. Emily's attempts to play the victim were painfully transparent against the mountain of evidence we had collected. Her pleas for leniency fell flat in the face of her financial betrayal. During one particularly charged court session, the judge looked directly at her, his expression hard as stone. "Mrs. Adams," he began, his voice firm. "The evidence presented here paints a clear picture of deceit and financial misconduct. This court cannot, in good conscience, award you a substantial portion of the marital assets, nor grant you full custody of your daughter." Emily's face crumpled, her gaze darting toward me with a desperate, almost pleading look. For a moment, I felt a faint flicker of something, pity, perhaps, but it quickly vanished. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of Grace, while Emily received limited visitation rights. The financial settlement was minimal, ensuring that she would not benefit from her betrayal. It was a hard-won victory, bringing a sense of closure and justice. As the dust settled, I focused on rebuilding my life. Grace and I moved to a new home, far from the memories of our old life. I wanted a fresh start, a place where we could both heal and move forward. Mike remained a steadfast friend, guiding me through the challenges of single parenthood and offering his support whenever I needed it. Meanwhile, Emily's life continued to unravel. Her relationship with David disintegrated under the strain of public shame and financial hardship. She was left with nothing but the bitter remnants of her own choices. Her cousin Anna's relentless mockery did not help matters. Known for her biting sense of humor, Anna turned every family event into an opportunity to remind Emily of her disgrace. One evening, during a family gathering, Anna raised her glass with a smirk. "Here's to Emily, always keeping it in the family, right?" Emily's face went beet red as she stared at her plate, humiliated, while the room filled with tense, silent judgment. As Emily became more isolated, my determination to protect Grace only grew stronger. But one person remained loyal to her, her Uncle Sam. A burly, bearded man with a harsh demeanor, Sam was a firm believer in family loyalty, no matter the circumstances. He was convinced that Emily's betrayal was my fault entirely, a result of my supposed neglect. In his eyes, any woman who strayed did so because her husband had failed to love her properly. Desperate for refuge, Emily escaped to Sam's farm in the neighboring state. Sam welcomed her without question, offering her a sanctuary away from prying eyes and harsh judgments. But rumors soon reached me. Apparently, Sam had been calling me every name in the book, blaming me for the breakdown of our marriage, claiming I had driven Emily to David. It stung. Even though I knew Sam's accusations were baseless, they lingered like a slow burn wound, and I realized that he would not let this go easily. One afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from an old friend who lived near Sam's farm. "Hey, just heard Emily's staying with her Uncle Sam," the message read. "Word is he's pretty riled up about the divorce. You might want to be careful." I sighed, setting down the knife I had been using to chop vegetables. The last thing I needed was more drama, but I knew better than to ignore the threat Sam posed. His temper was legendary, and his loyalty to family was absolute. If he chose to act, things could turn very ugly. A few days later, I was picking Grace up from school when my phone rang again. It was the same friend, his voice urgent. "Thomas, I just saw Sam in town. He was talking about you, and he did not sound happy. Said something about making sure you pay for what you did to Emily. Thought you should know. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as a chill settled over me. This was escalating faster than I had anticipated, and I knew I could not afford to let my guard down. I knew I had to secure Grace's future, making certain that Emily would not take more than she deserved. With Mike's help, we began digging through our financial records, hoping to uncover any hidden trails of betrayal. Mike, always the tech wizard, set up a system to monitor Emily's bank accounts and credit card transactions. What we found was like a slap in the face. Not only had Emily been lavishly spending on herself, but she had also been secretly funneling money to David. Thousands of dollars had been transferred to his account, disguised as payments for services. One evening, Mike looked up from the computer screen, his face dark with disbelief. "Dan, you need to see this," he said, pointing at the data on the screen. "Emily has been siphoning funds from your joint account to support David. This is not just infidelity, this is financial abuse." I stared at the screen, each number a fresh wound. The rage simmered, cold and relentless. "Unbelievable," I muttered, my voice low. "She's been using our hard-earned money to fund her affair. This changes everything." Mike nodded solemnly. "We need to compile this evidence. This will strengthen your case and ensure she walks away with as little as possible in the divorce." We spent the next few days meticulously gathering and organizing the financial records, creating a detailed report that laid bare every single deceitful transaction. As we worked, a twisted sense of satisfaction grew in me. Every line of evidence, every damning detail, brought me closer to justice. When it was ready, I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Collins to review our findings. As I walked into Mr. Collins's office, he greeted me with a firm handshake and a grave expression. "Dan, good to see you. What have you got for me?" I handed him the file, and he leafed through the evidence, his eyebrows raising in shock as he absorbed the contents. "This is substantial," he said quietly. "With this, we can argue that she not only betrayed you emotionally but also financially. The court will not look kindly on this." "Exactly," I replied, steeling myself. "I want to ensure Grace is taken care of, and that Emily does not walk away with more than she deserves." Mr. Collins nodded, his tone resolute. "We will present this in court. This will have a significant impact on both the divorce settlement and custody arrangements. You have done the right thing by gathering this evidence." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of court appearances and tense proceedings. Emily's attempts to play the victim were painfully transparent against the mountain of evidence we had collected. Her pleas for leniency fell flat in the face of her financial betrayal. During one particularly charged court session, the judge looked directly at her, his expression hard as stone. "Mrs. Adams," he began, his voice firm. "The evidence presented here paints a clear picture of deceit and financial misconduct. This court cannot, in good conscience, award you a substantial portion of the marital assets, nor grant you full custody of your daughter." Emily's face crumpled, her gaze darting toward me with a desperate, almost pleading look. For a moment, I felt a faint flicker of something, pity, perhaps, but it quickly vanished. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of Grace, while Emily received limited visitation rights. The financial settlement was minimal, ensuring that she would not benefit from her betrayal. It was a hard-won victory, bringing a sense of closure and justice. As the dust settled, I focused on rebuilding my life. Grace and I moved to a new home, far from the memories of our old life. I wanted a fresh start, a place where we could both heal and move forward. Mike remained a steadfast friend, guiding me through the challenges of single parenthood and offering his support whenever I needed it. Meanwhile, Emily's life continued to unravel. Her relationship with David disintegrated under the strain of public shame and financial hardship. She was left with nothing but the bitter remnants of her own choices. Her cousin Anna's relentless mockery did not help matters. Known for her biting sense of humor, Anna turned every family event into an opportunity to remind Emily of her disgrace. One evening, during a family gathering, Anna raised her glass with a smirk. "Here's to Emily, always keeping it in the family, right?" Emily's face went beet red as she stared at her plate, humiliated, while the room filled with tense, silent judgment. As Emily became more isolated, my determination to protect Grace only grew stronger. But one person remained loyal to her, her Uncle Sam. A burly, bearded man with a harsh demeanor, Sam was a firm believer in family loyalty, no matter the circumstances. He was convinced that Emily's betrayal was my fault entirely, a result of my supposed neglect. In his eyes, any woman who strayed did so because her husband had failed to love her properly. Desperate for refuge, Emily escaped to Sam's farm in the neighboring state. Sam welcomed her without question, offering her a sanctuary away from prying eyes and harsh judgments. But rumors soon reached me. Apparently, Sam had been calling me every name in the book, blaming me for the breakdown of our marriage, claiming I had driven Emily to David. It stung. Even though I knew Sam's accusations were baseless, they lingered like a slow burn wound, and I realized that he would not let this go easily. One afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from an old friend who lived near Sam's farm. "Hey, just heard Emily's staying with her Uncle Sam," the message read. "Word is he's pretty riled up about the divorce. You might want to be careful." I sighed, setting down the knife I had been using to chop vegetables. The last thing I needed was more drama, but I knew better than to ignore the threat Sam posed. His temper was legendary, and his loyalty to family was absolute. If he chose to act, things could turn very ugly. A few days later, I was picking Grace up from school when my phone rang again. It was the same friend, his voice urgent. "Dan, I just saw Sam in town. He was talking about you, and he did not sound happy. Said something about making sure you pay for what you did to Emily. Thought you should know." My grip tightened on the steering wheel as a chill settled over me. This was escalating faster than I had anticipated, and I knew I could not afford to let my guard down. I grabbed my phone and immediately called Mr. Collins, explaining the situation and my suspicions in a shaky voice. "We need to act fast," he said, his tone serious. "I'll contact the police and inform them about Sam. But in the meantime, do not do anything rash. Let the authorities handle this." I nodded, though my mind was already racing, imagining myself driving to Sam's farm and getting Grace back myself. Soon, the police arrived, taking statements and coordinating a broader search. They assured me they would do everything possible to find her, but it felt like cold comfort as night fell. I sat on the porch, wide awake, gripped by helplessness, waiting for any news. Then my phone buzzed, displaying an unknown number. I answered, my heart hammering in my chest. "Dan," came Sam's rough voice. "I've got Grace. Do not bother calling the police, she's safe with me." My blood ran cold. "Sam, you have no right to take her. Bring her back now, or I swear." "Or you'll what?" Sam interrupted, his tone taunting and dark. "You've done enough damage. Grace is better off with family who knows how to take care of her. You have proven yourself unfit." "You have no idea what you're doing," I snarled, barely keeping my voice steady. "Bring her back, or I'll make sure you regret it." Sam chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Try it, Dan. Just try it." And with that, the line went dead. I stood there, clutching my phone, hands trembling with fury. This was not just about the divorce or Emily anymore, this was about my daughter's safety. The police advised caution, telling me they would secure a warrant and coordinate with authorities in Sam's state. But time felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I called Mike, voice taut with urgency. "I cannot just sit here, Mike. I have to go get her." "Dan, think this through," he replied. "Sam is dangerous. Let the police handle it." "No," I said firmly, a cold resolve settling in. "This is my fight. I am getting my daughter back." Mike sighed, hearing the determination in my voice. "All right. I am coming with you. We will be smarter together, but we have to be careful." We packed up quickly and headed out, driving through the night towards Sam's farm. The tension in the car was thick, but I forced myself to stay focused. Grace needed me. Nothing else mattered. As we neared Sam's property, we parked a distance away and approached on foot. The farmhouse loomed in the distance, its dim lights casting eerie shadows across the yard. We moved quietly, keeping to the cover of trees until we reached the edge of the property. Peering through a window, I saw Grace sitting on the couch, looking scared but unharmed. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by fierce determination. I turned to Mike. We need to get her out fast and quietly. Mike nodded, understanding. I will create a distraction. You grab Grace and get her out of there. We'll meet back at the car. I nodded, and Mike moved to the side of the house. Moments later, I heard a loud crash, followed by the frantic barking of dogs. Sam's booming voice sounded, and I watched as he stormed out of the house, heading toward the noise. I seized the opportunity, slipping in through the back door. Grace looked up, eyes wide with a mix of relief and fear. Dad. It is okay, sweetheart. I am here to take you home, I whispered, scooping her up. We made our way back to the car, my heart pounding with each step. As we reached the tree line, I heard Sam's furious shout behind us. Dan. You think you can just take her? I clutched Grace tighter, breaking into a run. We did not look back until we were safely in the car, speeding away from the farm. My heart raced, but Grace was safe in my arms, and that was all that mattered. We drove through the night, heading straight to the nearest police station to ensure Grace's safety and to report everything that had happened. The officers took our statements, reassuring us that they would handle Sam from here. As dawn broke, I held Grace close, exhausted but relieved. This ordeal had shown me just how far I would go to protect my daughter. No matter what lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face it. Mike put a steadying hand on my shoulder. You did it, Dan. She's safe now. I nodded, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift slightly. We did it. And I will not let anyone threaten my family again. As we drove home, a renewed sense of determination filled me. Emily and her family had tried to tear us apart, but Grace and I were stronger. Whatever came next, we would face it together. No one would ever take her from me again. The next morning, the police returned to Sam's farm to investigate further. They found only Emily, sitting alone in the living room, looking worn and defeated. Sam had vanished, leaving his truck behind. It seemed he had another vehicle stashed away and had used it to escape. Emily was taken into custody for questioning. At the station, she was adamant that she had no idea about Sam's plan to take Grace. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I arrived at the station, with Grace being looked after by one of the officers. A mix of anger and relief churned within me. Grace was safe, but the ordeal had left its mark on both of us. When I saw Emily sitting in the interrogation room, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me: anger, betrayal, and, somewhere deep down, a flicker of pity. An officer led me to the room where she was being held, and as I walked in, she looked up, her eyes filled with a desperate mixture of guilt and hope. Dan, she whispered, her voice trembling. I did not know. I swear, I had no idea what Sam was planning. I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Emily, this has gone way too far. First, the affair, and now this. How can I believe anything you say? She lowered her head, tears spilling down her face. I know I have made terrible mistakes. I am so sorry, Dan. I never meant for any of this to happen, Emily whispered, her voice thick with regret. But I know. I know, sorry doesn't even come close. It sure doesn't, I replied coldly. You let Sam take Grace. You put our daughter's safety on the line. Emily's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't know, she said, her voice breaking. I thought she was safe with you. When I realized what Sam had done, I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. She looked up at me, her eyes desperate. Please, Dan, you have to believe me. I stared at her, my chest heavy with the weight of her words. Despite everything, a small part of me wanted to believe her, to think that somehow, this mess wasn't entirely her fault. But the damage went too deep. Why did you come here, Emily? I asked, my voice softening, though it still held a firm edge. She wiped her tears, meeting my gaze with pleading eyes. I came because I had nowhere else to go. Sam was the only one who supported me, and I never thought he would do something like this. Her voice cracked, and she clasped her hands together. Please, Dan, I'm begging you. I need another chance, for Grace's sake, for our family. The word family hit a raw nerve, and I felt a surge of anger. Our family. Emily, you shattered our family, I said, my voice rising. You cheated on me, you lied, and now our daughter's been put through a nightmare because of you. How can you ask for forgiveness after all of this?" Emily sobbed, her shoulders shaking as she clutched herself. I know I don't deserve it. But I love Grace, and I still love you. I made a horrible mistake, but I want to make it right. Please, Dan, give me a chance to prove it." I took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions inside me. "Emily, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But for Grace's sake, I'll think about it. Just understand this, you'll have to earn it, and it will not be easy." A glimmer of hope appeared in her tear-streaked eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy, anything you ask. Just please, let me be part of Grace's life." I studied her face, the desperation and regret clearly etched into her features. "We'll take this one step at a time. But for now, you need to cooperate fully with the police and help them find Sam. He's a danger to all of us." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will. Thank you, Dan." As I turned to leave the room, I felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. Emily's plea seemed genuine, but the scars of her betrayal ran deep. Healing would take time, if it was even possible. I walked back to where Grace was waiting, and her face lit up when she saw me. I hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of the past few days lift, if only slightly. For her sake, I tried to navigate this uncertain path, but I would tread carefully, determined to protect her from any more pain. As we left the station, I felt a sense of resolution. Emily's place in our lives was uncertain, but Grace and I had each other, and that was enough. We would take things one day at a time, finding our way forward together. Back at home, I tucked Grace into bed, reassuring her that she was safe and loved. Sitting by her side, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter what came next, I would always be there for her. Emily's plea for forgiveness was just the beginning of a long, difficult journey, one we would face together with resilience and love. A few weeks after the incident with Sam, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Grace was slowly recovering, and I was doing my best to give her the stability and love she needed. Emily had been cooperative with the police, but Sam was still on the run, casting a lingering shadow over our lives. One afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but I answered it anyway, curiosity winning out. "Hello. Dan, it's David." I tensed at the sound of his voice. The last time we had spoken was during the confrontation at his house, and I had no desire to hear from him again. "What do you want, David?" "Look," he began, sounding hesitant. "I know you probably do not want to talk to me, but I need to meet with you. I owe you some money. Part of what Emily transferred to me, I want to give it back." Suspicion flared immediately. Why now? What was his real motive? Why should I believe you? I asked, my voice laced with doubt. "I get it. You have no reason to trust me," he said, a note of resignation in his tone. "But I swear, I am trying to make amends. Meet me at the cafe on Elm Street tomorrow at noon. We can talk then." I hesitated, but something in David's voice sounded almost genuine. "Fine," I replied. "But if this is some kind of trick—" "It's not," he interjected quickly. "I'll see you tomorrow." The next day, I arrived at the cafe a few minutes early, scanning the room for David. I spotted him at a corner table, and he looked different, subdued, almost remorseful. I approached cautiously, bracing myself. "Dan," he greeted, standing and extending his hand. I shook it, reluctantly, before sitting across from him. "Let's get this over with," I said, keeping my tone cold. David nodded and pulled an envelope from his jacket, sliding it across the table. "This is part of the money Emily gave me. I want to return it to you." I opened the envelope and saw several bills inside. Suspicion bubbled up immediately. Why the sudden change of heart? David sighed, rubbing his temples as if weighed down by his own actions. "I've had a lot of time to think since everything went down. I realized just how much harm I caused. I'm sorry for my part in all of this." I studied his face, searching for any trace of deceit. "You expect me to believe that you've just turned over a new leaf?" "No," he admitted, his expression somber. "But I did want to congratulate you on getting Grace back. I heard about Sam, and I hope that psychopath is found soon. No child should have to go through that. I nodded, still wary. Is that all, David? He hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice dropping. There's something else you should know. When Emily and I were together, she said a lot of things about you. Things you might want to hear. A flash of anger surged through me. What are you talking about? She used to complain about you constantly, he continued, his voice low and hesitant. She said you were cold, unloving, obsessed with work. She made it sound like you were the worst husband in the world. His words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. My fists clenched under the table as I fought to keep my composure. Why are you telling me this now? Because I think you deserve to know the truth, he replied, meeting my gaze. I don't know if she's genuinely sorry now, or if she's just trying to manipulate you again. But I thought you should be aware of how she really felt. I stood up abruptly, my mind reeling with conflicting emotions. I need to go. Dan, wait, David called after me. I know I've hurt you, and I am sorry. But you deserve better. Do not let her fool you again. I left the cafe in a haze, feeling a storm of emotions building inside me. David's words echoed in my mind, casting shadows over Emily's recent apologies. Could she really have changed, or was this all just another deception? When I got home, I found Grace playing in the living room, her laughter filling the house with warmth. Forcing a smile, I joined her, trying to push the doubts aside. But as the evening wore on, David's words kept resurfacing, gnawing at my mind. Later that night, after putting Grace to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the envelope of money on the coffee table. Emily had been cooperative, attending therapy, making an effort to reconnect with Grace and me. But now, every sincere word she had spoken felt tainted by doubt. I needed answers. I called Emily, asking her to come over. She arrived a short while later, looking anxious but hopeful. Dan, what's going on? She asked, taking a seat. I met with David today, I said, watching her reaction closely. She flinched, then quickly composed herself. Why? He wanted to return some of the money you gave him. I held up the envelope. And he had some things to say about you. Emily looked down, her hands trembling slightly. Dan, He told me what you used to say about me, I interrupted, my voice hard. That I was cold, unloving, obsessed with my work. Is that how you really felt? Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head slowly. Dan. I was angry and confused. I said things I did not mean to justify my own actions. But I never stopped loving you. I wanted to believe her, but the doubts lingered, thick and persistent. How can I trust you, Emily? How do I know this is not just another manipulation? She reached out, her hand covering mine. I know I've hurt you deeply. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove I've changed. I want to be a better person for Grace and for you. I pulled my hand back, standing and pacing the room. You need to understand how hard this is for me. I'm trying to protect Grace and myself from more pain. Emily nodded, wiping away her tears. I understand. And I'm willing to earn your trust back, no matter how long it takes. I looked at her, searching for any trace of deceit. She seemed genuine, but the scars of her betrayal were still fresh. We'll take this one step at a time. But if I find out you're lying to me again, it's over for good. She nodded, relief and determination in her eyes. Thank you, Dan. I won't let you down. As she left, a heavy weight settled on my shoulders. The road ahead felt uncertain, filled with doubt and mistrust, but for Grace's sake, I would try. I owed her that much. Later, I sat by Grace's bedside, watching her sleep peacefully. She was my anchor, my reason for moving forward. Whatever the future held, I knew I had to be strong for her. With that resolve, I prepared myself for the difficult journey ahead, determined to protect my family from further harm. In the days that followed my conversation with Emily, hope and uncertainty mixed in equal measure. I tried to take things one day at a time, focusing on Grace and our daily routine. Emily continued her efforts to regain my trust, attending therapy and spending time with Grace. But the scars of betrayal ran deep, and David's words continued to haunt me. One morning, while making breakfast for Grace, I noticed an envelope lying on the doorstep. It had not been there the night before, and the cameras I had installed showed no activity. Somehow, someone had disabled them briefly during the night, just long enough to leave the envelope. I felt a surge of apprehension as I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a letter, the handwriting instantly familiar. It was from Sam. Dan, do not bother trying to find me. By the time you read this, I'll be long gone by the time you read this. I've crossed the border into Mexico, well beyond the reach of your law, or theirs. I am in places where even the bravest fear to tread. Here, I can live in peace, free from your interference. But do not think for a second that you have seen the last of me. You wronged Emily. You failed her as a husband, pushed her into David's arms. For that, fate will punish you, and maybe one day, so will I. You may feel safe now, with your cameras and all your precautions, but remember, Dan, I am always watching. You will never know when or where, but my presence will linger, a shadow over your life. The justice you seek will never be yours, because I will be the one to deliver it. Live your life. Take care of Grace. But never forget, I am out there, and one day, you will pay for what you have done. Sam. I read the letter twice, each word sinking in, leaving a bitter taste of fear and anger. Sam's threat was clear, and knowing he'd slipped into Mexico, beyond the reach of any conventional justice, left a chill in my heart. He was out there, somewhere, harboring his grudge, and he wanted me to know it. Just then, Grace wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Dad, what's for breakfast? I quickly folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket, forcing a smile. Pancakes, sweetheart. Your favorite. As I prepared breakfast, my mind raced, turning over the implications of Sam's letter. His words were more than empty threats, and I could not ignore them. I had to find a way to protect Grace, to ensure our safety despite the shadow now hanging over us. After breakfast, I called Mike, explaining the situation. He arrived shortly after, his expression dark as he read the letter. This is not good, Dan, he said, handing the letter back to me. Sam's unhinged, and he's clearly capable of anything. We need to take this seriously. I nodded, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. But what can we do? He's in Mexico, and the police cannot touch him there. We cannot control what Sam does, Mike replied firmly, but we can control how we respond. We need to step up security, stay vigilant, and make sure Grace is safe, no matter what. Over the next few days, Mike and I fortified the house, upgrading the security system, adding more cameras, and coordinating with a network of trusted neighbors who promised to keep an eye out for anything unusual. I also met with local law enforcement, sharing the letter and requesting increased patrols in the neighborhood. Yet, even with these precautions, the sense of unease never fully lifted. Every shadow, every unexpected noise served as a reminder of Sam's lurking threat. But I refused to let fear dictate our lives. Grace deserved a childhood untouched by the specter of danger, and I was resolute in providing that for her. One evening, as Grace played in the living room, Emily arrived for her scheduled visit. She looked nervous, her eyes searching mine, as though seeking a sign of forgiveness. Dan, I know things are uncertain between us, she began hesitantly, but I want you to know that I'm here for Grace. Whatever happens, she's our priority. I nodded, recognizing the sincerity in her words. I know, Emily. I'm trying to move forward, for Grace's sake. But it's not easy. She lowered her gaze, nodding. I understand. I'll keep working to regain your trust, no matter how long it takes. As she spent time with Grace, I found myself reflecting on the choices that lay ahead. Sam's letter had added another layer of complexity to our already strained situation. Forgiving Emily and rebuilding our relationship seemed even more daunting with the constant threat looming over us. But as I watched her with Grace, I felt a small flicker of hope, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, we could navigate this together. Later that night, after Emily had left and Grace was asleep, I sat alone in the quiet of the living room. I pulled out Sam's letter once more, reading his venomous words. His threats were a stark reminder of the dangers we faced, but they also ignited a fierce resolve within me. I would not let him dictate our lives. I would protect my family at any cost. The path forward was murky, filled with doubts and unknowns, but I knew one thing for certain: I would face whatever came my way with strength and determination. For Grace, I would create a life free from fear. And as for Emily, only time would tell if trust could truly be rebuilt. But I was willing to try, one step at a time. As the night deepened, I felt a glimmer of hope. Despite the threats, despite the past, we held the power to shape our future. With that hope, I prepared myself to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together, we could overcome anything.
What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.